Chen Kai had waited 2 years for this day. The manager who claimed credit for his project and took the promotion was finally demoted and placed under investigation. When the news spread, former colleagues began sending him messages. One said, "He finally got what he deserved." Another said, "That project was clearly yours. At least everyone can finally see what he did." Chen Kai stared at his phone and smiled. He thought he could finally let go. That same night, he opened the man's profile again. The manager had just uploaded a photograph from a dinner gathering. In the picture, he was raising a glass with his friends. He did not look angry. He did not look defeated. Chen Kai stared at the photograph and suddenly felt irritated. Why could he still smile? Why could he continue living as though nothing had happened, even after being demoted? Chen Kai kept refreshing the page. He did not stop until 2 in the morning. The next day, a friend asked him, "You already have a better job. You earn more than before and he has been punished. Why do you still check his profile every day?" Chen Kai placed his phone on the table. "I just want to see when someone like him will finally receive the punishment he truly deserves." His friend did not ask another question, but one question remained. The person who hurt Chen Kai had already failed. Why did Chen Kai still feel that he had not won? 2 years earlier, Chen Kai had been responsible for an important company project. He spent 3 months conducting research. He organized the data, contacted clients, and designed the complete plan for execution. The day before the formal presentation, his manager said, "You do not have enough experience. I will present it tomorrow. You can sit beside me and add anything necessary." Chen Kai agreed. The next day, the manager stood at the front of the meeting room and presented the entire plan as his own idea. The directors praised his judgment. Senior management immediately placed him in charge of a new department. After the meeting, the manager patted Chen Kai on the shoulder. "Young people should not be in such a hurry to claim credit. If the project succeeds, everyone benefits." Chen Kai wanted to object, but the manager had revised the plan, and Chen Kai's name was not clearly recorded on the documents. He needed the job. He did not have enough evidence, and he did not dare challenge someone who had just been promoted. In the end, he said nothing. From that day onward, Chen Kai replayed the meeting in his mind. He imagined standing up in front of everyone, opening his computer, projecting every record onto the screen, showing them who had truly completed the project. The confrontation that never happened in reality took place again and again in his imagination. A few months later, Chen Kai left the company. His new job suited him better. The salary was also higher. The original harm appeared to belong to the past. But whenever someone mentioned that manager, Chen Kai's body would immediately tighten. He still needed to know how the man was doing. He needed to know whether he had failed. He needed to know when everyone would finally admit Chen Kai had been the person who was wronged. The harm had ended, but resentment preserved that day inside him. Chen Kai wanted the man to receive a harsher punishment. Was that justice or revenge? This question cannot be resolved by simply telling someone to let go. When a person has been deceived, humiliated, or deprived of what they earned, wanting the person responsible to pay a price is not necessarily immoral. It may contain a genuine sense of justice. He did something wrong. He should not be allowed to continue without consequences. If people who cause harm never face responsibility, rules will eventually restrain only those willing to follow them. Revenge and justice are therefore not completely unrelated. Many acts of revenge begin with a fragment of justice. The ancient Greek tragedy, the Oresteia, pushes this problem to its most extreme form. Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter so that the Greek fleet can sail to war. His wife, Clytemnestra, kills Agamemnon partly to avenge their daughter. Their son, Orestes, then kills his mother to avenge his father. The Furies pursue Orestes because the murder of a mother also demands punishment. Everyone has a reason. Every act of violence can be presented as the correction of an earlier injustice, but the result is this. Every act of revenge creates a reason for the next act of revenge. At the end of the trilogy, Athena does not allow either side to continue privately deciding who deserves punishment. She establishes a court. Accusation, defense, evidence, and judgment enter a public process. This transformation matters. It does not deny the suffering of those seeking revenge. It refuses to let the person who has suffered most become judge, prosecutor, and executioner at the same time. When someone is living inside pain, it is difficult to answer. How much suffering would be enough? Is losing a position enough? Is a public apology enough? Is financial compensation enough? If the person remains happy after being punished, does that mean the punishment is still incomplete? Revenge can begin from a sense of justice, but revenge does not automatically become justice. Justice requires evidence. It requires proportionate consequences. It requires consistent standards, and it requires a point at which responsibility has been addressed. Revenge is more likely to ask, how much more must he suffer before I feel that I have won? That is where revenge and justice begin to separate. Anger and resentment can look very similar. Both may begin with deception, humiliation, unfairness, or abuses of power, but they can move a person in different directions. Anger can still turn toward reality. Someone crosses a boundary, so I demand that they stop. Someone takes credit for my work, so I preserve the records, make a complaint, or leave the relationship. Anger can be intense, but it may still have a concrete aim. Something in reality must be changed. Resentment often grows when action has been blocked. A person cannot fight back. They are afraid to speak. They do not have evidence, or the event has already passed and there is no opportunity to deal with it again. The energy does not disappear. It turns inward. Action in reality becomes repetition inside the mind. Real resistance becomes imagined revenge. The person repeatedly imagines, one day he will lose everything. One day everyone will discover that I was right. One day he will regret what he did to me. Anger wants the harm to stop. Resentment needs the person who caused the harm to remain inside consciousness. As long as that person has not completely failed, the story feels unfinished. In 1887, Nietzsche published On the Genealogy of Morality. The book does not simply tell people which moral system they should follow. Nietzsche asks another question. How did our ideas of good and evil come into existence? Who created these values? What forms of life produced them? When someone calls an action evil, they may be defending an important principle. Nietzsche also wonders, could some moral judgments contain a revenge that could never be carried out openly? In the first essay of On the Genealogy of Morality, he uses a French word, ressentiment. It is often translated as resentment, rancor, or long-suppressed hostility. It is different from temporary anger. When someone has no power to respond directly to harm, ressentiment may begin to become creative. It renames the enemy. It reinterprets the person's own condition. It may even begin creating values. Nietzsche describes the process in deliberately sharp terms. When action is denied, compensation is found through an imaginary revenge. At first, the person simply says, "He hurt me." Later, the statement may gradually change. The power he possesses is itself evil. The fact that I do not possess that power proves that I am morally better. A defeat in reality is rearranged into a moral victory. Strength, pride, ambition, and self-assertion are redescribed as evil. Endurance, obedience, humility, and powerlessness are redescribed as moral goodness. Nietzsche calls this value structure, which begins by condemning an enemy-slave morality. The term is deliberately provocative. It does not mean that real victims are always wrong. It does not mean that humility, compassion, or restraint are secretly worthless. Nietzsche is describing one possible way in which values are created. A person cannot begin from their own life and state what they affirm. They must first look at the enemy and say, "He is evil." Only then can they define themselves as good by becoming the enemy's opposite. Their values do not begin from affirmation. They begin as a reaction to someone else. Even after leaving his old company, Chen Kai continued to dislike people who were good at presenting themselves. When a new colleague confidently introduced an idea to management, Chen Kai would say, "People with genuine ability do not need to keep showing off." When someone pursued a promotion, he would say, "People who are too ambitious usually have no principles." When someone was skilled at building professional relationships, he would say, "They are only trying to flatter management." These judgments were not necessarily entirely false. Workplaces really do contain stolen credit, flattery, and power games. Chen Kai was no longer judging one specific action. His conclusion began to cover everyone who resembled his former manager. The ability to present became dishonesty. Ambition became greed. Leadership became manipulation. He had once been harmed by a form of power. Later, he needed to prove that the power itself was not worth possessing. The problem became clearer when his new company asked him to lead a team. He refused. He told himself, "I do not want to become someone obsessed with power." The principle may not have been the only reason he stepped away. Accepting the position would require him to speak clearly, make decisions, exercise authority, and face other people's dissatisfaction. These abilities reminded him of the person who had hurt him, so he rejected his own possibilities along with them. This is how resentment expands. At first, it is only a reaction to one person. Later, it begins deciding what kind of person deserves respect, what abilities should never be pursued, what kind of life counts as morally pure. Chen Kai appeared to be criticizing his former manager. In reality, the former manager had begun helping to design the rest of Chen Kai's life. Why do people remain inside resentment for so long? Saying that they simply cannot let go explains too little. Resentment is painful, but it also provides hidden benefits. As long as the other person remains completely evil, I can remain completely innocent. As long as his success came from corruption, I do not need to examine my own abilities and choices. As long as every present difficulty can be traced back to that original harm, I do not need to face a more difficult question. What can I still do from here? Resentment gives the self a stable position. I am the person who was betrayed. I am the person whose opportunity was stolen. I am the person who could have succeeded if someone else had not destroyed the chance. This identity explains the past. Gradually, it begins explaining the present as well. One injury becomes the center of an entire life. The enemy becomes an essential character in the story. Some people repeatedly say, "I only want to see him receive what he deserves, then I will let go." But when punishment arrives, they begin searching for new evidence. Emotion is not enough. Why does he still have friends? Losing power is not enough. Why does he not look miserable? Even an apology may not be enough. Did he truly regret what he did? Resentment often demands more than responsibility. It needs the other person's suffering to prove that one's own suffering finally had meaning. This demand has no clear ending. As long as the enemy continues living, he may appear not to have paid enough. Resentment therefore preserves the enemy, because once the enemy is no longer important, the person must answer another question. Who am I without this hatred? At this point, a dangerous misunderstanding can easily appear. It may sound as though anyone who remains angry is narrow-minded, or that any victim who demands punishment has fallen into resentment. That is not true. Bullying, deception, stolen work, and abuses of power really exist. Preserving evidence, revealing facts, demanding compensation, and pursuing accountability may all be necessary. Some relationships should never be restored. Some people should not be trusted again. Some systems must be changed. Let it go should never be used to protect someone who caused harm. Nietzsche's analysis should not become a tool for silencing the powerless. The real question is, What is my desire for revenge trying to accomplish now? If the facts have been revealed, the stolen work has been credited correctly, the losses have been repaired, and the person has faced proportionate consequences, do I still need to see them continue suffering? If the answer is yes, then what I am pursuing may no longer be only justice. Justice has a defined object, which action requires accountability. What damage needs repair? How can the same harm be prevented from happening again? Resentment may instead require an enemy who can never finish paying. As long as the enemy is still doing well, the person cannot declare victory. Justice has an end point when responsibility, repair, and proportionate consequences have been addressed. Revenge may continue demanding suffering after that point. Later, Chen Kai received another opportunity for promotion. This time, he accepted. He began working harder than ever. He arrived before everyone else. He was the last person to leave. His projects became increasingly successful. His income continued to rise. On the surface, he had transformed pain into motivation. But every time he achieved something, he wondered, what would that manager think if he saw this? He wanted the project to succeed so that the man would regret what he had done. He wanted to earn more so that he could prove the man had been wrong to look down on him. He imagined meeting him again one day. He wanted the man to finally realize the person he once pushed aside had become more successful than he was. This motivation was not completely false. Chen Kai really had become more capable. His life had genuinely improved. Sometimes a person survives the most painful period by holding onto a single act of defiance. The problem is not whether that motivation produced results. The problem is, who still decides what those results mean. When choosing his goals, Chen Kai was still responding to that man. When measuring success, he was still imagining that man. After achieving something, he still needed that man's regret to confirm his own value. The person who hurt him had left, but he remained the most important audience in Chen Kai's life. One question can test whether Chen Kai has truly moved on. If that manager would never discover your success and would never regret what he did, would you still want the life you are pursuing? If the answer is yes, because I value this work, this ability, and this way of living for their own sake, then the original desire for revenge has gradually become a direction of his own. But if the answer is, then what would be the point? I need him to see it. Then Chen Kai is still living in a world arranged by the other person. There is another question. If this enemy disappeared completely tomorrow, would I still know what kind of person I wanted to become? If Chen Kai cannot answer, hatred is doing more than motivating him. It is also providing his identity. Revenge can be the fuel that starts the journey, but it cannot remain the steering wheel of a life. Leaving resentment does not require forgiveness. Forgiveness also does not require reconciliation. A person may stop living through hatred while still deciding that someone should never be allowed back into their life. What matters is returning the energy trapped inside imagined revenge to reality. If accountability is possible, organize the evidence. If an appeal is possible, state the facts. If leaving is necessary, establish clear boundaries. If a system can be improved, make it more difficult for the same harm to happen again. Action may fail. Justice may never arrive completely, but action at least has a direction. It responds to reality. Resentment repeatedly returns a person to a scene that can no longer be changed, waiting for a more perfect victory. Chen Kai eventually organized the documents from the old project. He formally appealed to the company regarding the ownership of the work. He did not demand that his former manager be completely destroyed. He asked only that the project record be corrected and that each contributor's role be recognized. He dealt with the parts that could still be addressed. He stopped demanding that the other person repay lost time through endless suffering. After the appeal ended, Chen Kai opened the familiar profile one final time. The manager was still posting about his life. Some people supported him, others criticized him. Chen Kai looked for a few seconds. Then he unfollowed the account and placed his phone on the table. The action did not prove that he had forgiven him. It did not make the past acceptable. He had simply recognized. Every time he refreshed that page, he was giving the present day to someone who had already left his life. Harm could remain in memory. Accountability could still be pursued. But that person no longer needed to decide what Chen Kai should feel every day. The greatest danger of resentment is not simply that it makes us hate an enemy. It turns the enemy into the coordinate system of an entire life. I work hard so that he will regret what he did. I succeed so that I can prove he was wrong. Even my understanding of good and evil begins arranging itself around his image. I believe I am resisting him. But if every direction is still determined by him, then I have never truly left. Real freedom does not require us to declare that the person who hurt us was good. It does not require us to forget what happened. Revenge can contain justice, but justice must know what it is holding someone accountable for, and it must know when that responsibility has been addressed. Success can begin in hatred, but one day it must acquire a reason that no longer depends upon the enemy. Otherwise, the person who hurt me may have left, yet still continue signing their name beneath my future. Freedom begins with a more difficult decision. I will no longer allow his success to determine my suffering. I will no longer allow his failure to determine my happiness. I will no longer allow the way he once saw me to determine what I must spend the rest of my life proving. The person who hurt me can remain part of my history. He does not need to remain the author of my life. Resentment keeps the enemy inside us, arranging our values and direction. Freedom begins when we take the future back. From that moment onward, he no longer decides what I should hate, what I must prove, or who I should become.